The distress signal cut through the void of space like a blade through silk, its desperate frequency bouncing between asteroid fields and dead planets, until it finally reached the outer sensors of the Terran defense grid. On the bridge of the monitoring station Prometheus VII, Lieutenant Sarah Chen frowned at her console as the alien transmission played for the third time. Unknown vessel, to any receiving station. The universal translator crackled, converting the alien speech into broken standard. This is transport vessel Gentle Current of the Keth-Moran Republic. We carry 500 civilian refugees from the Outer Rim colonies. Our engines have failed. Life support critical. Please, anyone. We need immediate assistance. Sarah's fingers danced across her controls, triangulating the signal's origin. The coordinates made her stomach drop. The distress call was coming from the Maelstrom Nebula, a region of space so hostile that even human ships avoided it unless absolutely necessary. For aliens to be stranded there meant they were in serious trouble. Commander Rodriguez, she called to the duty officer. We've got a situation. Commander Maria Rodriguez approached Sarah's station, her weathered face creased with concern. At 45, she had seen enough deep space emergencies to know when something was truly urgent. The distress signal played again, and Rodriguez could hear the desperation bleeding through the alien voice. How many ships do we have in that sector? Rodriguez asked. Sarah checked the tactical display. None, ma'am. The nearest patrol vessel is the destroyer, Havoc. But she's 3 days out at maximum burn. And civilian ships? The cargo hauler New Mumbai is closer, maybe 18 hours, but... Sarah hesitated. Commander, they're carrying medical supplies to the Centauri colonies. If they divert, thousands of people could die from the plague outbreak there. Rodriguez studied the star chart, her mind racing through the calculations. The Keth-Moran were a peaceful species, traders mostly, who had helped humanity during the early expansion years. They deserved better than to die alone in that hellish nebula. But the resources simply weren't available for a proper rescue operation. What about the retribution? Sarah asked quietly. The bridge fell silent. Every officer present knew about the retribution, though few had ever seen her. She was humanity's answer to the horrors they had discovered in the galaxy's darker corners. While other species built ships for exploration and trade, humans had built the retribution for war. She's in the right sector, Rodriguez admitted. But the retribution isn't a rescue vessel, Lieutenant. She's a warship. She's also the only ship that can reach them in time. Rodriguez weighed the options. The Keth-Moran had been good allies to humanity. They had shared technology and star charts when humans first ventured beyond their home system. When the Zephyrian Empire had threatened human colonies, the Keth-Moran had stood with Earth despite having nothing to gain from the conflict. Get me Admiral Harrison on a priority channel, Rodriguez finally decided. And prep the long-range transmitter. We need to contact the retribution. 20 minutes later, Admiral James Harrison's gruff voice echoed through the communication array from Earth Command. The old spacer had fought in 3 major conflicts and lost count of the smaller skirmishes. His reputation for making hard choices had earned him both respect and fear throughout the human military. You're asking me to deploy our most classified military asset for a rescue mission? Harrison's voice carried across the light years with crystal clarity. Yes, sir. The Keth-Moran have been reliable allies. We can't abandon them now. There was a long pause before Harrison spoke again. The Retribution's current mission parameters are classified beyond your clearance level, Commander. But I'll consider your request. Stand by. The channel closed, leaving Rodriguez and her crew to wait. On the main screen, the Maelstrom Nebula swirled in false colors, its radiation storms and gravitational anomalies making it one of the most dangerous regions in known space. Somewhere in that chaos, 500 aliens were dying slowly as their life support systems failed. 47 light-years away, in the depths of the nebula itself, the transport vessel Gentle Current drifted helplessly through the stellar graveyard. Captain Veltar, of the Keth-Moran Republic, stood on his bridge, watching his crew work frantically to keep their ship alive. The Kethmoran were a tall, slender species with pale blue skin and large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Right now, those eyes reflected only fear. "Engineering report," Veltar called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Chief Engineer Mordun looked up from his console, his usually pristine uniform stained with coolant fluid. "Main engines are completely dead, Captain. The quantum resonator cascade took out everything. We're running on backup power, but it won't last more than 6 hours. And life support? 4 hours if we shut down everything non-essential. Maybe 5 if we reduce gravity to minimum levels." Veltar nodded grimly. They had been fleeing the destruction of their home colonies when the engine failure occurred. The Devastor plague had swept through the outer rim like wildfire, turning entire worlds into tomb planets. The gentle current carried the last survivors from 3 different worlds, families who had lost everything except their lives. "Any response to our distress signal?" he asked his communications officer. "Nothing yet, Captain. But we're deep in the nebula. It's possible our signal isn't reaching anyone." Young Ensign Kirava, barely out of the academy, looked up from her sensor station. "Sir, I'm detecting some unusual readings in the nebula. There's something wrong about this place." "Define wrong, Ensign." "The radiation patterns don't match any natural phenomena I've studied. It's almost like something is controlling the energy flows." Before Veltar could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in red as proximity alarms began wailing. On the main view screen, something massive moved through the nebula's swirling gases. "Contact bearing 047 Mark 18, the tactical officer shouted. Captain, it's huge." The shape that emerged from the nebula's concealing embrace was a nightmare-given form. The creature stretched nearly 2 kilometers from nose to tail, its hide covered in armor plates that seemed to absorb light itself. Rows of bioluminescent organs pulsed along its flanks like malevolent stars, and its mouth opened to reveal teeth the size of shuttlecraft. "Leviathan-class void predator," Mordun whispered. "I thought they were myths." The creature had clearly detected the dying ship. It moved with predatory grace through the nebula, drawn by the electromagnetic signatures of the gentle current's failing systems. These ancient horrors had evolved in the depths of space itself, feeding on metal and energy wherever they could find it. "All power to shields," Veltar ordered. "Send another distress signal on all frequencies." "Shields are at 30% and falling," the tactical officer reported. "That thing's generating some kind of energy drain field. It's pulling power directly from our systems." The Leviathan circled the transport like a shark sensing wounded prey. Its massive head turned toward the ship, studying it with alien intelligence. Then, with movements too quick for something so large, it attacked. The creature's assault wasn't random destruction. It targeted the ship's power relays and life support nodes with surgical precision. Each strike weakened the gentle current further, making it an easier meal for the Void Predator. The transport's light weapons were useless against something that had evolved to hunt in the deepest reaches of space. "Hull breach on decks 7 through 9, damage control reported. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but we've lost 20% of our habitable space." Veltar watched helplessly as his ship was slowly devoured. The civilians they carried were packed into cargo holds and passenger compartments, trusting him to deliver them safely to the inner colonies. Now they would all die together in this forsaken nebula. "Captain," the communications officer called out urgently. "I'm receiving a transmission. Unknown origin, but it's close. Put it through." A new voice filled the bridge, speaking in accented standard that carried the distinctive cadence of human speech. "Keth Moran vessel Gentle Current. This is the Terran warship Retribution. We have received your distress call and are moving to assist. Hold your position and prepare for immediate evacuation procedures." "Thank the ancestors," Mordun breathed. "But Captain, how can one ship evacuate 500 people?" Veltar was wondering the same thing when his sensors detected something new approaching through the nebula. The contact was much smaller than the Leviathan, barely 300 meters long, but it moved with purpose and speed that defied the hazardous environment around them. The human warship Retribution burst from the nebula's concealing gases like an avenging angel. Where Kethmoran ships were built for elegance and efficiency, this vessel was pure function over form. Its hull was a matte black composite that seemed to drink in light, broken only by the angry red glow of weapon ports and sensor arrays. It looked like death itself had taken physical form. Unknown human vessel, Veltar transmitted. We appreciate your response, but you should be aware there is a Leviathan-class predator in the area. Your ship appears too small to pose a threat to such a creature. The response came immediately, delivered in a tone that was calm, professional, and utterly cold. Kethmoran vessel. This is Captain Marcus Steele, of the TDS Retribution. We are fully aware of the hostile contact. Please maintain current position while we handle the situation. On the Gentle Currents bridge, the crew watched in amazement as the human warship positioned itself between their transport and the massive predator. The size difference was laughable. The Leviathan outmassed the Retribution by a factor of 50 to 1. The Void Predator seemed equally unimpressed by the newcomer. It turned its attention from the dying transport to this new potential meal, its bioluminescent organs pulsing brighter as it prepared to attack. The creature had hunted these nebulae for millions of years, and no prey had ever successfully challenged it. The Leviathan's first strike came without warning. Its massive tail whipped through space, moving fast enough to shatter asteroids. The attack should have crushed the human ship instantly. Instead, the Retribution simply wasn't there anymore. The warship had moved with impossible speed, its exotic drive systems allowing it to dance between the creature's attacks, like a fighter pilot dodging ground fire. As the Leviathan's tail swept through empty space, the human ship opened fire. The weapons that emerged from the Retribution's hull weren't like anything the Kethmoran had ever seen. Coherent antimatter streams lanced out at near light speed, followed by gravitic torpedoes that warped space itself. The exotic arsenal struck the Leviathan's armored hide, and actually hurt it. The ancient predator roared its fury across multiple dimensions, the sound causing reality itself to ripple. It had never encountered prey that fought back with such devastating effectiveness. Pain was an alien concept to a creature that had known only the hunt for eons. Impossible, Ensign Kirava whispered. That ship is maybe 1/50th the size of the Leviathan. How is it winning? Captain Veltar watched the battle unfold with growing awe. The human ship moved like a living thing, anticipating the creature's attacks and responding with weapons that seemed to violate known physics. Each shot was precisely targeted at nerve clusters and vital organs that the Kethmoran didn't even know existed. The Leviathan tried to use its energy drain ability on the Retribution, but the human ship's shields were unlike anything in the known galaxy. They didn't just deflect energy. They seemed to transform it into fuel for the warship's own systems. The harder the creature tried to drain the ship, the stronger it became. What are these humans? Mordun asked in amazement. Their technology is decades beyond anything we've encountered. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, the Leviathan floated dead in space, its massive form riddled with precisely placed holes that had severed every major nerve pathway. The human ship hadn't just killed it. They had performed surgery with weapons of war. Kethmoran vessel. Captain Steele's voice returned to the comm system, still maintaining that unsettling calm. Hostile contact has been neutralized. Prepare to receive boarding parties for emergency evacuation. As transport pods began launching from the Retribution's hull, Veltar realized that everything he thought he knew about humanity was wrong. These weren't the peaceful explorers and traders that the Kethmoran had befriended. These were predators who made Leviathans look like prey animals. The rescue was about to begin. But Captain Veltar couldn't shake the feeling that his people had just made contact with something far more dangerous than any void predator. The humans had come to save them. But what price would that salvation carry? As the first human boarding pod docked with the Gentle Current, Veltar prepared to meet their rescuers face to face. He had no idea that this encounter would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Captain Veltar got his first look at the humans who had just slaughtered a leviathan like it was nothing more than an annoying insect. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about Earth's children. The first human through the airlock was a woman who couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, but she moved with the fluid grace of an apex predator. Her environmental suit was black as the void itself, covered in sensors and equipment that the Kethmoran couldn't identify. When she removed her helmet, Veltar saw sharp features, calculating eyes, and hair the color of burnished copper pulled back in a tight ponytail. "Captain Veltar," she said, somehow knowing his identity despite never having met him. "I'm Commander Lisa Park, Executive Officer of the Retribution. We're here to get your people out safely." Behind her came 5 more humans, each carrying equipment that looked more like weapons than rescue gear. They spread out through the gentle currents corridors with military precision, their movements coordinated like a pack of hunters surrounding prey. "Commander Park," Veltar began, "we are grateful for your assistance. But I must ask how your ship was able to destroy that creature so easily. Our records indicate that leviathans are nearly indestructible." Commander Park's smile was sharp enough to cut metal. "Your records are based on encounters with normal ships, Captain. The Retribution isn't normal. We're what happens when a species from a death world decides to build something that can survive in places that make their home world look like a vacation resort." She gestured for him to follow as her team began setting up equipment throughout the ship. "We've analyzed your vessel's structural integrity. She's got maybe 2 hours before the hull breaches become critical. We need to evacuate 500 people in less than 90 minutes to maintain a safety margin." "That's impossible," Chief Engineer Mordun protested. "Your ship is too small to carry that many beings." One of the human technicians looked up from his work, grinning in a way that showed too many teeth. "You're thinking in terms of normal space, friend. We don't operate under normal limitations." As if to prove his point, the human activated a device that caused the air itself to shimmer. Suddenly, what had been a narrow corridor was now a space large enough to comfortably hold 50 Kethmoran. The walls, floor, and ceiling had somehow expanded without changing the ship's external dimensions. "Dimensional expansion technology," Commander Park explained casually. "We borrowed the concept from some rather unpleasant entities that tried to invade our space a few years back. Turns out that when you kill gods, you can salvage some very interesting technology from their corpses." Veltar's translator must have malfunctioned, because the human had just claimed they had killed divine beings and stolen their technology. That was clearly impossible, even for the species that had just defeated a leviathan. The evacuation proceeded with terrifying efficiency. Human soldiers moved through the gentle current like ghosts, appearing wherever they were needed most. They carried the injured with gentle care, while simultaneously scanning every corridor for threats that didn't exist. Each human seemed to be running multiple tasks simultaneously, their enhanced minds processing information faster than Kethmoran computers. Young Ensign Kirava approached one of the human technicians who was helping elderly Kethmoran into transport pods. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, "but how is your technology so advanced? The last time we shared scientific data, humans were still using primitive fusion drives." The technician paused in his work, considering her question. He was young for a human, probably no more than 25 standard years, but his eyes held the kind of experience that came from surviving impossible situations. "That was before the revelation," he said quietly. "Before we learned what was really out there, in the dark between the stars." "What revelation?" "That the galaxy isn't the peaceful place everyone pretends it is. There are things out there that make leviathans look like house pets. Things that have been hunting younger species for millions of years. We found that out the hard way when they tried to farm humanity like cattle." The young human's voice carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone so young. "The Devourers came to our space thinking we'd be easy prey. They'd done it to hundreds of species before us. Set up breeding programs, harvested entire populations, used our children as food for their young. Kirava's large eyes widened in horror. That's monstrous. What did you do? What any sane species would do when faced with extinction. The human smile was cold enough to freeze helium. We adapted. We learned. We became something worse than the things that hunted us. He gestured toward Commander Park, who was directing the evacuation with calm efficiency. The commander there? She was on Titan when the first Devourer ship arrived. She was 12 years old. Watched them harvest her entire colony while she hid in a maintenance shaft for 3 days. The technician returned to his work, helping a family of Kethmoran refugees into the expanded space. By the time the Devourers realized their mistake, it was too late. We'd reverse-engineered their technology, improved it, and built ships like the Retribution. Ships specifically designed to hunt the hunters. But surely you could have just defended yourselves, Kirava protested. Why become aggressive? The human stopped working and looked at her with something that might have been pity. Because defense isn't enough when you're dealing with an enemy that reproduces by consuming entire civilizations. The Devourers had to be wiped out completely, or they'd keep coming back. So we hunted them across the galaxy, until every last one was dead. He paused, then added quietly, and we found out they weren't the only things out there that treated younger species like livestock. As if summoned by the conversation, Commander Park appeared beside them. She had moved so quietly that neither Kirava nor the technician had noticed her approach. The human ability to move without making sound was deeply unsettling to a species that relied heavily on audio cues. Sergeant Morrison, Park addressed the technician. How's the evacuation proceeding? Ahead of schedule, ma'am. The Kethmoran are very cooperative. We should have everyone aboard the Retribution within the hour. Excellent. Park turned to Kirava with that predator's smile. I hope Sergeant Morrison hasn't been filling your head with too many scary stories about humanity's past. He was just explaining how your technology became so advanced, Kirava said carefully. Ah. The abbreviated version then. Park's expression grew serious. The truth is, Ensign, that humanity discovered we live in a galaxy full of predators. Some hunt for food, some for sport, some for reasons we can't even comprehend. The choice was simple. Become prey, or become something that preys on the predators. She gestured toward the Retribution, visible through the nearest viewport. That ship represents everything we learned from 5 years of total war against entities that considered us livestock. Every system, every weapon, every defensive measure was paid for in human blood. But you're rescuing us, Kirava pointed out. That doesn't sound like the behavior of predators. Commander Park's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since her arrival. That's because the Kethmoran aren't prey, Ensign. You're allies. You helped us when we were weak, shared your knowledge freely, and stood with us against the Zephyrian Empire when you had nothing to gain from the conflict. Her expression hardened again. The things we hunt are different. They're parasites that consume civilizations for sustenance or entertainment. There's a difference between a species that helps others and one that feeds on them. The evacuation continued around them as Park explained humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to galactic apex predators. The process had been brutal, driven by necessity rather than choice. When faced with extinction, humans had done what they did best. They had adapted. The worst part, Park continued, was realizing how many species had gone extinct before we figured out what was happening. The Devourers had been operating for millions of years, wiping out entire civilizations. We found their feeding grounds scattered across the galaxy, worlds where billions had lived and died to satisfy the appetite of parasitic entities. She paused to help an elderly Kethmoran onto a transport pod, her movements gentle despite the devastating weapons visible on her equipment harness. That's when we made the decision that changed everything. We weren't just going to survive. We were going to make sure this never happened to anyone else. You appointed yourselves as galactic protectors? Kirava asked. We appointed ourselves as galactic exterminators, Park corrected. There's a difference. Protectors wait for threats to emerge, and then react. Exterminators hunt down threats before they can harm innocent species. The implications of that statement were staggering. Humanity had essentially declared war on any species that posed a threat to galactic civilization. They had become the immune system of an entire galaxy, destroying infections before they could spread. How many species have you eliminated? Kirava asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 17 parasitic civilizations, 3 machine intelligences that were converting organic matter into computronium, and about 47 individual entities that defied classification, Park recited matter-of-factly. We also sterilized the Devourer homeworld, and every planet they'd used as a breeding facility. The casual way she delivered those statistics was somehow more terrifying than the numbers themselves. Humanity had committed genocide on an industrial scale, and they spoke about it the same way other species discussed shipping schedules. Doesn't that make you monsters? Kirava whispered. Commander Park considered the question seriously. Maybe. But we're monsters that protect innocent species instead of consuming them. If that's what it takes to keep the galaxy safe, then we'll be the most efficient monsters in existence. A new voice crackled through the comm system, speaking in the same cold, professional tone they'd heard earlier. Commander Park, this is Captain Steele. We have company. Park's demeanor instantly shifted to combat readiness. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace at the nebula's edge. Configuration matches Zephyrian Empire military vessels. Looks like someone's been tracking our refugees. Aspi. And now there comes that. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees as Park processed this information. The Zephyrian Empire was known for its expansionist policies and its habit of claiming refugee populations as property of whatever worlds they'd fled from. Sir, Morrison called from his monitoring station. I'm reading battle cruiser-class vessels. They're moving in fast. Quote, quote, quote. Park activated her wrist communicator. Captain, what's our status? All evacuation pods are aboard, but we're still processing the refugees through decontamination. We need at least 30 minutes before we can safely enter hyperspace. Understood. Can the gentle current be moved? Negative. Her engines are completely dead, and structural integrity is failing. She's got maybe 20 minutes before total hull collapse. Park looked at Kirava and the remaining Keth Moran crew members. Looks like you're about to see why the Retribution was built the way it was. Through the viewport, they could see the 3 Zephyrian ships approaching at high speed. Each vessel was massive, built for intimidation as much as combat. Their hulls gleamed with polished metal and decorative elements that served no purpose beyond displaying the Empire's wealth and power. This is Imperial Battlegroup Conquest, a new voice announced over the comm system. Unknown human vessel. You are interfering with Empire property retrieval operations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Captain Steele's response was delivered in the same calm tone he'd used throughout the rescue operation. Zephyrian vessels, this is the Terran warship Retribution. The beings aboard the transport vessel are refugees under the protection of the Galactic Accords. Any attempt to claim them as property will be considered an act of piracy. The Zephyrian commander's laughter echoed through the comm channel. Human, you are vastly outnumbered and outgunned. We claim these refugees as escaped property of worlds under Empire jurisdiction. Surrender them immediately. Counteroffer, Steele replied. Leave now, and I won't add 3 more ships to my kill count today. The threat seemed absurd. The Retribution was outnumbered 3 to 1, and each Zephyrian ship was larger than the human vessel. By every conventional measure, the humans should have been begging for mercy. Instead, something changed in the space around the Retribution. The nebula itself seemed to respond to the human ship's presence, its swirling gases forming patterns that defied natural physics. Energy readings spiked across every spectrum as the vessel prepared for combat. What's happening? Veltar asked, his voice tight with concern. Commander Park's smile returned, and this time, it was absolutely terrifying. Captain Steele is about to demonstrate why humans don't make idle threats. The first Zephyrian ship opened fire with enough energy to crack a moon. The beams lanced through space toward the Retribution, weapons that could have vaporized anything built by conventional technology. The human ship simply absorbed the attack. Every photon of energy disappeared into the Retribution's hull, as if it had never existed. The vessel didn't even register the impact. Impossible, the Zephyrian commander shouted. Nothing can absorb that much energy. You're right, Captain Steele agreed. Nothing conventional can. Fortunately, we stopped building conventional ships. After the first few times, something tried to eat us. The Retribution's return fire was a masterpiece of controlled destruction. 3 precise shots, each targeting a different Zephyrian vessel. The weapons didn't just destroy the enemy ships. They unraveled them at the molecular level, turning thousands of tons of military hardware into expanding clouds of component atoms. The battle lasted 14 seconds from first shot to the complete annihilation of the attacking fleet. When it was over, there was nothing left of the Zephyrian Empire's battle group except debris and radiation signatures. Clean up on Aisle 3, Captain Steele announced dryly. Commander Park, are we ready to depart? All refugees are aboard and processed, Captain. The Gentle Current's crew is requesting permission to remain with their ship. All refugees are refugees. All refugees are aboard and processed. Denied. That hull will collapse within minutes. Get them aboard now. The final evacuation proceeded quickly, with the last Kethmoran crew members reluctantly abandoning their dying vessel. As they watched through the Retribution's viewports, the Gentle Current finally succumbed to structural failure, breaking apart in a shower of metal and atmosphere. 500 years of service, Veltar said quietly. She deserved better than this. She saved her crew and passengers, Commander Park replied. That's all any ship can ask for. As the Retribution prepared to enter hyperspace, Kirava realized that everything she thought she knew about the galaxy had just changed. Humanity wasn't the peaceful, cooperative species that the Kethmoran had befriended. They were something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. They were the apex predators of a hostile galaxy, and they had just demonstrated why no sane species would ever threaten their allies. The rescue had been successful, but Kirava couldn't shake the feeling that the Kethmoran had just witnessed the birth of a new galactic order, one where humanity held the leash on the monsters that lurked in the dark. The hyperspace journey to the nearest safe harbor took 18 hours, giving the Kethmoran refugees their first extended look at humanity's true capabilities. The Retribution's interior was a marvel of impossible engineering, with corridors that changed size based on need and gravity fields that could be adjusted down to the individual square meter. Captain Veltar found himself in what the humans called the diplomatic quarters, a space that had been configured specifically for non-human guests. The room was larger than his entire bridge had been, yet somehow still felt intimate and comfortable. The walls displayed a gentle starfield that moved at just the right speed, to be calming rather than disorienting. A soft chime announced an arrival, and the door opened to admit Captain Marcus Steele himself. Veltar had expected a massive, intimidating figure based on the man's reputation, but Steele was surprisingly ordinary-looking. Average height for a human, graying hair, and tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless difficult decisions. Captain Veltar, Steele said, settling into a chair that somehow adjusted itself to accommodate his human physiology. I hope you and your people are comfortable. I know this has been a traumatic experience. We are grateful beyond words, Captain Steele, Veltar replied. Your ship and crew saved 500 lives today. But I confess, I am confused by many things I have witnessed. Steele nodded, as if he'd been expecting this conversation. Ask your questions. After what you've been through, you deserve honest answers. The technology your ship possesses, it's centuries beyond what we believed humans had achieved. Your weapons, your shields, Your dimensional manipulation systems. How did you advance so quickly? The human captain was quiet for a long moment, staring at the artificial star field on the wall. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of painful memories. We had good teachers, he said finally. Unfortunately, they were trying to kill us at the time. Steele activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. Images appeared, showing various alien species, their ships, their weapons, and their technologies. But these weren't the peaceful traders and explorers that populated most of the galaxy. These were monsters. This is what we discovered when we ventured beyond our local stellar neighborhood, Steele explained. The galaxy isn't the peaceful place most species believe it to be. There are things out there that view younger civilizations as nothing more than resources to be harvested. The first image showed a creature that defied description. It was part machine, part organic tissue, and part something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Veltar's mind could process. The Devourers, Steele continued. They reproduce by consuming the neural patterns of entire species. They'd find a promising young civilization, study them for a few decades, then harvest every thinking being on every world they controlled. But surely such entities are rare, Veltar protested. We've never encountered anything like this. That's because species that encounter them don't usually survive to warn others. Steele gestured, and the display showed a star map with hundreds of dead systems marked in red. This is what we found when we started investigating disappearances in our region of space. System after system, where civilizations had simply vanished, leaving behind empty worlds and radiation signatures. The scale was staggering. Hundreds of species, billions of individual beings, all consumed by parasitic entities that treated intelligence like a renewable resource. The Devourers found humanity about 7 years ago, Steele continued. They set up the same pattern they'd used successfully for millennia. Infiltrate our society, study our neural patterns, prepare for harvest. What happened? Steele's smile was cold enough to freeze nitrogen. They made the mistake of underestimating a species that evolved on a death world. When we realized what was happening, we didn't just defend ourselves. We went to war. The holographic display showed images of massive space battles, but these weren't the clean, sterile conflicts depicted in most historical records. These were brutal, desperate struggles, where both sides employed weapons that seemed designed to cause maximum suffering. The war lasted 5 years, Steele said. By the time it was over, we'd learned to reverse engineer technologies that other species considered impossible. We'd captured Devourer ships, interrogated their crew members, and stolen every piece of useful technology they possessed. And then we hunted them to extinction. Every ship, every base, every breeding facility. We found their homeworld and sterilized it so completely that not even bacteria survived. We made sure they could never threaten anyone again. Veltar studied the images, trying to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. Humanity had fought a war against entities that consumed civilizations, and they had won so decisively that they'd driven their enemies to complete extinction. But that wasn't the end, Steele continued. Once we started looking, we found more of them, different species, different methods, but all of them treating younger civilizations like livestock. Machine intelligences that converted organic matter into computing substrate. Energy beings that fed on the suffering of sentient creatures. Hive minds that reproduced by forcibly assimilating other species. The display cycled through dozens of different threats, each one representing a form of life that was utterly hostile to the concept of peaceful coexistence. So we made a decision, Steele said quietly. Humanity would become the immune system of this galaxy. We would hunt down these parasitic entities before they could harm innocent species. And the retribution? She's one of 12 ships in her class. Each one is designed to engage and destroy threats that normal military vessels couldn't even detect. We carry weapons reverse-engineered from entities that existed before this galaxy was formed. We use shield technology stolen from machine gods that tried to convert our solar system into raw materials. Steele gestured, and the display showed the Retribution's technical specifications. The numbers were incomprehensible, representing energy outputs and defensive capabilities that exceeded anything in Veltar's experience. Your ship could conquer the entire Kethmoran Republic, Veltar said in amazement. She could conquer most of the known galaxy, Steele agreed. But that's not why she was built. The Retribution exists to hunt things that make conquest look like a children's game. A new voice interrupted the conversation as Commander Park's image appeared in the holographic display. Captain, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. Report, Steele said, instantly alert. Long-range sensors are picking up distress signals from the Andranian system. Multiple ships under attack by unknown hostiles. Based on the energy signatures, it's not anything in our threat database. Steele's expression hardened. How far? 12 hours at maximum hyperspace velocity. And the Kethmoran refugees? We can drop them at Nexus Station in 4 hours. They'll be safe there. Veltar watched this exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't an isolated rescue mission for the humans. This was what they did every day. Hunt down threats to galactic peace and destroy them before they could spread. Captain, Veltar said slowly. May I ask you something personal? Steele nodded. Do you ever regret what humanity has become? You were explorers once, scientists and artists. Now you're something else. The human captain was quiet for a long time, considering the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo from his soul. Every day, he admitted. Every single day, I think about what we might have been if we'd never encountered the things that hunt in the dark. We could have been like the Kethmoran, building beautiful ships for exploration and trade. We could have spent our time creating art and advancing science, instead of perfecting new ways to kill entities that shouldn't exist. He stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the swirling chaos of hyperspace. But then I think about all the species that are still alive because we made this choice. The Andromedans, the Centauri colonies, the crystal singers of Vega Prime. They're all still breathing, still creating, still exploring, because humanity decided to become something monstrous enough to fight the real monsters. And that's enough? It has to be, Steele said simply. Because the alternative is watching innocent species get consumed by things that view intelligence as nothing more than a particularly tasty form of food. 4 hours later, the Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at Nexus Station, the massive trading hub that served as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of different species. The station's docking bays were designed to accommodate vessels of various configurations, from the flowing organic curves of Altarian bioships to the geometric precision of Volcari crystal constructs. The evacuation of the Kethmoran refugees proceeded smoothly, with station personnel providing temporary quarters and medical care for those who needed it. Veltar watched his people disembark with mixed feelings. They were safe now, but they were also refugees with no homes to return to. Captain Veltar. Commander Park approached as the last of the civilians left the ship. Captain Steele asked me to give you this. She handed him a small device that looked like a communication unit. But the technology was clearly human in origin. What is it? Emergency beacon, Park explained. If your people ever encounter something they can't handle, activate that device, and we'll come running. Consider it a thank you gift for all the times the Kethmoran helped humanity when we were still learning to navigate the galaxy. Veltar accepted the device with reverence. He understood the significance of what he was being offered. Humanity's protection was worth more than entire star systems in terms of security. There is one thing I must know, he said. Today, when you destroyed those Zephyrian ships, you did it so easily. Are we all children, compared to what humanity has become? Park's expression grew thoughtful. In terms of raw military power? Yes. Humanity has had to become something that can fight gods and win. But in terms of wisdom, compassion, and the ability to create beauty, you're still our teachers. She gestured toward the station's viewing galleries, where Kethmoran refugees were already gathering to watch the stars and plan their futures. You see hope where we see threats. You build for beauty where we build for function. You create art while we create weapons. Don't lose that, Captain. The galaxy needs species like yours to remind the rest of us what we're actually fighting to protect. The Retribution departed Nexus Station 20 minutes later, racing toward the Andranian system and whatever new threat awaited them there. Veltar watched from the station's observation deck as the human warship accelerated to impossible speeds and vanished into hyperspace. Later, in the temporary quarters assigned to displaced Kethmoran civilians, Ensign Kirava approached her former captain with questions that had been troubling her since the rescue. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "what do we do now? Our worlds are gone. Our ship is destroyed. And we're refugees in a galaxy that's apparently far more dangerous than we ever imagined." Veltar considered her question while studying the emergency beacon the humans had given him. Such a small device. But it represented the protection of the most powerful military force in galactic history. "We do what the Kethmoran have always done," he said finally. "We adapt, we learn, and we help others. The humans may have become the galaxy's protectors, but they still need allies who can remind them of what they're protecting. You want us to work with them? I want us to be worthy of their protection," Veltar corrected. "If humanity has chosen to bear the burden of fighting monsters so that others can remain innocent, then the least we can do is make sure that innocence is worth preserving." He activated the device and studied its simple interface. Somewhere in the galaxy, the Retribution was racing toward another crisis, another threat that required the intervention of humanity's terrible mercy. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "someone needs to make sure they remember that they're fighting to protect beauty, not just to destroy ugliness. The humans may have become predators, but they're our predators. And that makes all the difference." As the station rotated slowly through space, Veltar began planning for the future. The Kethmoran would rebuild, as they always had, but this time, they would do so with the knowledge that they were protected by beings who had willingly sacrificed their own innocence to preserve everyone else's. In the depths of space, the Retribution continued its eternal hunt, carrying weapons that could unmake stars and the will to use them against anything that threatened the peaceful species of the galaxy. Humanity had become something beautiful and terrible, guardians who protected through strength rather than wisdom. And somewhere in the Andranian system, another species was about to discover that when the monsters came calling, the Deathworlders answered back with violence that made hell itself seem like a pleasant vacation spot. The SOS had reached the Deathworlders, and the galaxy would never be the same.